To my first teacher was Elena Alexandrovna. I would never have remembered her name if it wasn't my classmate who had helped me out with that. I didn't like her. Years later, I figured out why. For her absolute and fierce pedagogically incorrect behavior. Perhaps she was a product, a mirror of the society, of our Soviet system. You have no idea how many such teachers we had in our schools. The notorious sadistic, like the one in Pink Floyd's Just Another Brick in the Wall. As I have said, I wasn't doing good in her class. I went to another school next year. My first teacher was Lydia Fyodorovna. We all, including me, adored her. She had her own unconventional teaching methods that absolutely would involve the whole class in the learning process. During the reading, the whole class would be doing this. A student of the first desk would start reading the first line in the textbook, then the next line will be taken over by his or her next right-hand student, then the next desk in a row up until the entire class was covered. While the one reads, the rest would follow the lines waiting for their turns. Same with poems. The homework was to memorize them. The following day we all, on Lydia Fyodorovna's command, would stand up along the class perimeter walls, so we wouldn't have any chance to look at the book, as I figured later, and each of us, in turn, would read his/her line. There was no escaping with her. If you hadn't learned a poem, she will get you for sure. No tricks either. You never knew when she was going to reshuffle us. In the same manner, the whole class participated in math problem solving and case study tasks. And there was a lot of quizzes she was giving to us. Especially I liked when she would arrange individual readings for us. Occasionally she would have stacks of books on the class windowsills brought from the school library for us. Those were the illustrated children's books of fairy tales, stories, and we, the kids, each independently picked a book whatever we liked and read them. For me it was almost like browsing the internet back then. After you finished one book, there were one or two stories, rarely more than that, in a book. You would go to the windowsill for the next. We would read a lot on a day like this. Thanks to those methods of our LF, I quickly learned to read fast and got to love reading, and got my myopia later because of that as well. LF loved both her job and us. That is why, perhaps, the situation with discipline with us in her class was terrible, to say the least. For example, we could easily have a hump on her for almost anything, for having given a rocket, flunking, or just yelling at anybody of us. That was not very pedagogical but very humane on her side. The kids normally act this way with their parents when they want to draw their attention. I would, for example, start disobeying her, stop doing any of quiz works she had given to me and be a beast of myself. Amazingly, I don't remember the girls acting like this on her, only the likes of us, the boys. Weird. Well, I have never become a top achiever of any sort with Lydia Fyodorovna, but I was close to being a good B student. She did a good job on me. In the 3rd grade, just a few months after the beginning of the school year, we had our new first teacher, the third one in my life. LF was going. Maybe she was going to retire. I don't know. Couple years later I saw her running an extended daycare group. None of us would want to part with LF. Valentina was a young and good-looking woman, and she quickly established a strict discipline in our rough class. No more grievances and breaths. No such things would ever work on her. Along with established order, she also introduced proven, albeit standard, methods of teaching. Everybody's school diaries were kept in order now, but the overall performance of all went down. But, surprisingly, I kinda liked it. I liked the order she had established. No more pet students. No walking on the class and other nonsense during her classes, which were common with LF. The students' knowledge though was being tested by more traditional methods now. She would call a kid to the board, which for me personally was not overly stimulating to read the books, but we had gotten used to it and even liked her. That was mutual. She turned out to be a good teacher and a nice person as well. On each occasion, we gladly would visit our LF, but I would never want her to come back, not to our class anyway, and get us all out of hand again. Most of the class didn't feel the way I did about it though. My performance with her has fallen as well, not drastically, but still. On the other hand, she had taught us some discipline, set strict per simple rules and order, and we all, since we learned them, had all benefited from it. I was doing not too bad with her. I know that Valentina is still alive and well, watching her goats on the Scabby Mount slopes. I would like to see her someday. 3. My Uncle Bob. I just remembered of my now deceased, may he rest in peace, uncle. Everybody called him Uncle Bob. I do not know why, because his name, in fact, was Rivkadabi. He was a flamboyant big Tatarian guy of Troyekurov's, from Pushkin's Dubrovsky novel, Habits. Before retirement, he made his living as an in-house designer, and off-duty he was drawing as a labor of love. Apparently, he wanted to leave his trace in the history of art or something. He had a lot of his big paintings, like his self-portraits in which he, for example, was sitting on the bank of a picturesque river by his village with lilies in, with a three-piece suit on him and staring dreamily into a distance. Sure, he was looking to become something. Kim Il-sung himself, no less. All the socialist realism canons were kept in his paintings. Incidentally, later I saw the original photos he was painting himself from. However, rather than becoming something great, he was known for his outrageous and violent temper, which were going mostly to his beautiful wife and kids instead. His kids didn't like him. They would call him Bob or the hundredweight one behind his back. A hundredweight seemed to be a lot to me back then. Now, for quite a few years, I myself weigh way more than that, while we, his nephews, adored him. When he was drunk, he was so funny to us, especially to my sister and myself. Once we, me and my sis, were listening to a music in one of their bedrooms, that what we could only afford then. We had nothing to listen to in our home, as the hall and the front room was full of guests, and my Uncle Bob entered the room we were in and immediately started dancing with a very focused and serious impression on his face, not paying any slightest attention to our laughing at him. By the time the music ended, he was jerking violently on the floor. It feels really damn great, being a modern dancer. He'd say with his usual loud voice, and off he'd go, pleased with himself, to further mingle with the rest and to get some more shots, leaving us rolling on the floor fighting our fits of laughter. 10 years later, I saw this kind of a dance he had danced when everybody started getting crazy about this fashionable breakdance in the middle of 80s. At his kick UPS, Uncle Bob would often hold the best singer contest, in which he always would be a winner. In fact, I would like to see the one who would dare to challenge him with his rigged contest's results. Well, this was only beginning. He would also make everybody mimic the deer trot, running yet another of his contests to find who is the damn best at that. And all the guests, including us, the kids, would do it. No kidding. Nobody dared him to back down from this nonsense. Imagine yourself to be his next-door neighbors. And who do you think was the winner? Of course him again. What about moving one's ears? And he did that too, being the best. I have been working very hard for 16 years on that. And he always demanded that he was being praised. And he was being praised. And you could do nothing about it. Or he would get us, all of his guests' kids and his youngest son, together, rank us up and have us sing in a chorus with him directing us, and we were doing our best, and there were reasons for that. His son had just already gotten a good slap from him for his reckless aping, for not taking him seriously, that is. We all had his message. I mean, what a charming man he was. I was considered to be his favorite nephew. He would grab me in his arms and put me in the middle of a table in front of his guests and would go like, "He is my favorite nephew." And then he would turn back to me again, "Hey you. Tell me, what are you looking to become when you grow up?" And I, of course, would go like, "An artist." "Sure, you are." And he would give me a chocolate candy bar for that. It was good if it had not ended up with an epic fist fight again. It would happen too. More than once the police had taken him away. Probably it was because of him when, several years later, whenever my hometown police stopped me to check my paper, they would take me to their precinct for better checks. They'd better be careful with guys like us. He planned to start creating masterpieces after he is retired. Yes. He would say, I will be creating great masterpieces. My dear humble Uncle Bob. He died quite a few years ago and left many of his paintings all right. I don't know if they were valuable or not, I don't understand the painting. He never had grandchildren from any of his 3 sons, but he had seen my daughter. My wife says that when I am drunk I am acting more and more like my beloved Uncle Bob. And I am even becoming to look like him, even when I am still sober. P.S. As far as I recollect, there was a huge painting hanging on a wall in his apartment hall, the copy of Perrault's Hunters at Rest. When I was a schoolboy I was taking for granted that it was my Uncle Bob's painting even whenever I saw its reproductions. Here is another who took over his job and on whom Uncle Bob would never bet on. It's my younger brother, who is a very successful and a self-trained craftsman. May you rest in peace, my Uncle Bob. Normally, when they rename the non-Russian guys to the Russian-style names they would call Rashid to Russian Roma, Mahmoud will be Misha, but I will never figure out why he was Uncle Bob. For my little brother, if you think I'm crazy, you should see my brother. All our family is just like that, you know. He is a man not so open-minded as I am, and I never had asked his permission to write about him, so I'll never tell you his name. Sorry about that. He is just my brother. Okay. And I am proud of him, and you will soon know why. Before I had my daughter, it was him I loved most in the world. I wonder if he ever knew about that. But I know him very little. He was 10 when I went to the north and left my parents' house for good, and we had little contacts since then, which I regret. I wasn't visiting them much on my vacations, we didn't have any Skype back then, not even a cell phone, just a simple phone set was an unattainable luxury for most of us. Maybe if I hadn't left him, if I continued the same relations with my brother, he may have been able to avoid many troubles both he had and brought us all into. He, who thinks I was touchy, should know my brother better. You have not seen the real touchy ones. And God forbid to offend him. He had shown his exaggerated resentments early. When he was just 5 months old he already was able to detect slightest notes of reproach addressed towards him, like some of us grumbling at him for pooping in his linen. We didn't have any disposable diapers back then, everything had to be washed, and we didn't have a washing machine either, and here we go. He would frown, amusingly curve his mouth and begin to cry. I was struck by this. Later my daughter was never even close like that. And since then my brother always has been this way. With him, I learned early to watch my mouth. Once, he was about 13 years old, he didn't talk to me for about 2 months for some of my careless phrases. I had to apologize to him. I've scribbled a page on him and I still don't know where to start. I want to write both succinct and compact chapter about him. And on topic too. He's 12 years younger than me. I would never know how it felt to have an older brother who was sure that he had every right to bring his little one up in accordance with his what is peculiar for teens, extreme ideologies, and with a very low sense of danger, thus often subjecting both himself and his brother to unreasonable risks. I was sculpting some personality out of him. I would never let him cry to begin with. He was born to be a real man after all. I would never one almost like in the Soviet movie The Rooks. Never mind, that doesn't make any sense to you. Does it? That remark is meant to be read by my Russian readers. Well, I have this for them in Russian. Allow him to show any weaknesses or signs of fatigue. I taught him to ignore any pains. Once I jokingly lashed him with the twigs of nettles, but he only reacted with a laugh in response. And he only was 5 years old. Once my dad sent me to our summer cottage to bring some beans that had been collected. 5 kilos of it. But it still had to be sorted out, which I hated. I took a 4-year kid with me. We walked 5 kilometers. I had motivated my bro that after that we would go to the park so he would ride his favorite pedal-operated cars. For that though, he had to sort beans out first. He didn't like that and made a scene, grizzling like hell. But I was unrelenting. Once beans were sorted out, we'd go, I meant we'd take a commuter bus, actually, back and then to his precious park. And I went inside the hut, leaving him crying outside, and buried myself in a magazine. His cry had subsided and I looked out to see what he was doing, and there he was, sitting under the sun at noon and sorting out beans. And he had done it all. What did you think you were doing to your little brother, you fucking Dr. Spock? Whenever I remember this, I have it all flip over inside me. Knocking down the kid like that? In my defense, I would only say though that I had complied to all the promises I had made to him. He had a really good time riding those foot-powered little cars he loved so much until he had enough of it. Of course, I thought that all I did was for his own good. But methods? And was it really serving good to him anyway? I was so convincing at educating him to always defend his dignity, honor, and everything that it only brought him trouble. Us too, but a lot of trouble he brought to himself first. He was still 5 when I got drafted. He was 10 when I left them for good. When we were horsing around like crazy. You know the boys. The furniture in our apartment would collapse and fly to pieces because of us. Our mom after work, tired as she was, and upset with us, would scream at me like, "He is a damn kid but you are not, you are fucking over 20. At least you are the one who is supposed to have some brains." Well, I had none. I mean zero, zip, nothing. The Soviet army was a tough thing. Brutal. This is, well, like Foreign Legion where you had yourself forcibly herded to the prison, the only thing that could have been worse. Sure, you could get adapted there too, but for anyone with some overblown sense of dignity, it was like living in hell. I never told him anything about the army, and he wrote me a letter about that when he got drafted. I don't remember this letter of his, but this reproach in it I do. That was his rebuke to me. And I should have told him that the army was a quintessence of the very Soviet social system. It was a closed system and, as any closed systems in order to preserve itself, it was structured to create within itself some self-regulatory mechanisms. And this fucking system, due to the extreme scarcity of its positive motivational feedbacks, such as vacations, check passes for Sundays, women, salary, none have existed for the most of them. It was totally based on violence. Everything was based on violence there, including jokes, dirty cracks, and rituals. And very specific army subculture was born, which officially was called Code Red or just hazing. By the way, I never myself ever heard any new jokes told in the army. That was one of the many costs of this closed system. Officers generally tried to control this phenomenon and regularly, as a warning to others, put those that have absolutely been taken off their belts to jail. But smart ones among officers, however, secretly used this, and very effective, system of violence to maintain order. Any recruit feared the old file much stronger than the most ferocious officer there. An officer, in some ways, was like a safety valve, some military disciplinary regulation enforcer, the guarantor, defender who kept any specifically aggressive old conscript in check. The first 6 months of the 2 years were torture for the most, if not all, 18-year-old recruited kids, especially in the first 3 months. The sergeants, who just had gotten out of the hell themselves and had their new shoulder loops now and, perhaps for the first time, some power over the others in their life, were running real wild. The old files were bad too, but those who have served a year and just stopped getting their asses kicked all the time were even worse. Those were real animals. And once in a while, somebody would make an attempt to escape this hell. That's what I should have told my little brother about the army. I was sure he would always cope with the extreme situation. He didn't. At about when he was 15 or 16 he got stronger than me, I felt it when I just fooled with him around. And you know from this book I was a hell of an undefeated fighting machine myself, and I am paying with my eyes for all this now. With just one blow to my shoulder, for the seconds he could turn my arm off so it just wouldn't work at all. I felt as if I was fucking paralyzed. How the fuck he could do that? I never taught him that. What a fucking commando or something he was going to become. And there some big bruise would be seen on my shoulder for a month or so. His fists got bigger and heavier. Much heavier than mine's. Sure, I was pretty much positive that nothing would happen to him, he'd handle it. Well, it did happen. Mad, my brother stole a bike and drove it out from that fucking military base. Fuck you all. I am glad that he at least had not killed with his AK-47 his fellow soldiers who had just beat him up. He didn't take any ammo with him, and that probably has saved him his young life. Well, he had turned up in Turkey. Straight from the top-secret restricted area, he had been serving, to a potential NATO enemy country. He never asked for any political asylum, and never was going to. Russia now was officially a free and open country, and the uncontrolled violence in its army was a real problem, and Russia was admitting that. So, he turned himself in. FSB was going over my parents' house, and I was summoned in the north to testify too. I must say that at that time, I mean in the mid-90s, the FSB, ex-KGB, guys were really nice to us all. They all were courteous, correct, and polite. And poor. The oil prices were down as never before, and the government had little money to pay its employees. I remember myself sitting there. I had just renovated my newly bought apartment, and inspecting their ragged walls, felt superior over all them, glancing down at their cheap South Korean television set sitting on an old table and two VCRs, one on top of another. I had no contact with them ever since, but I also heard a lot of stories about them guys running wild on the street, especially under Putin's rule. And my dad, he was a pen pusher too. There were no social networking back then, so he was putting his precious thoughts into his notebooks. And FSB guys rummaging my parents' apartment found those notebooks of his where my pop, about 20 years before this country turned around towards China, with his fruity expressions, wrote about how Russia would get under China. That confused explanations my dad was giving were no overly convincing to those FSB guys. When they asked, what the hell was that supposed to mean, pointing their fingers to my dad's notes. I'm telling you, they were really nice guys back then. And in jail too, as my little brother says, they treated and fed their prisoners well. He served his time in the disciplinary battalion. I knew even from my time in the army, what kept me in check, by the way, that all preferred to trade in jail for a disciplinary battalion, or a dispat as we called it here, and would go for more crimes to go to jail. The only, but a significant advantage was that you had no criminal records after having served dispat. Any prison looked like a resort, a spa compared to a dispat out here. So my little brother came out of all that shit a completely different person, and we've never fooled around as we used to before. He has seen more in his life than I have in mine. We have never discussed this with him. He doesn't smoke, neither does he drink much. I always loved him as an older brother should. And now I began to respect him. When he thawed out a bit, he got married. He has opened his own business. He is very determined. And very independent too. Very few stand guys of his kind. He is also an artist, like our past Uncle Bob you have read above. He has a nice son, who looked like his grandfather to his delight. And an A student, just like his grandfather used to be. It's a shame he did not live that long to see that. Sure, he would have been glad to learn that he had his genes passed on all right. This he never could wait on us, the assholes. Anyway, I am proud of my brother. By the fact that he, no matter what, is making his way to success. And he works for Google.